Self-respect begins with clear boundaries, not loud declarations or dramatic exits, but quiet decisions made again and again. Boundaries are not walls built out of fear, they are lines drawn out of understanding. When a woman knows where she ends and others begin, confusion disappears. She no longer explains herself endlessly or feels guilty for protecting her time, energy, and values. She understands that access to her life is earned, not assumed. Clear boundaries start internally. Before the world respects them, she must respect them herself. This means noticing what drains her, what dishonors her, and what silently teaches others that her needs come last. Every time she ignores discomfort to keep peace, a boundary weakens. Every time she tolerates disrespect to avoid conflict, she trains others to repeat it. Self-respect requires the courage to feel temporary discomfort instead of permanent regret. Boundaries are often misunderstood as selfishness, but in reality, they are acts of honesty. A woman with boundaries does not pretend. She does not say yes when her body and mind are saying no. She does not overgive to feel worthy. She does not stay silent to be liked. She chooses clarity over approval even when clarity costs her attention, praise, or relationships that were never aligned to begin with. When boundaries are clear, her behavior changes. She listens more to herself and reacts less to others. She does not rush to respond, explain, or defend. She observes. She decides. She moves accordingly. This calm decisiveness unsettles people who are used to crossing lines without consequence. Some will resist, some will test her limits again and again. But consistency is power. The boundary does not need to be repeated loudly. It only needs to be enforced quietly. Clear boundaries reshape relationships. They filter out those who only benefit from her lack of them. They attract those who understand respect without being taught. Conversations become simpler. Expectations become cleaner. Drama loses its grip because boundaries remove the fuel it feeds on. A woman no longer carries emotional burdens that were never hers to hold. There is strength in refusing to negotiate self-respect. A woman with boundaries does not bargain with basic dignity. She does not explain why kindness matters or why honesty is non-negotiable. She understands that anyone who requires excessive justification to respect her was never planning to do so. Her silence, her distance, her refusal to engage becomes the answer. Boundaries also protect her inner world. They give her space to grow without interference, to heal without pressure, to think without noise. With boundaries, she conserves energy instead of leaking it into endless emotional labor. She becomes intentional with her attention, aware that what she feeds grows. Peace becomes less accidental and more designed. As boundaries strengthen, self-trust grows. Each time she honors her limits, she proves to herself that she is safe in her own hands. This trust changes how she walks into rooms, how she speaks, how she chooses. She no longer seeks permission to be herself. She no longer waits for external validation to confirm what she already knows internally. Clear boundaries are not about control, they are about alignment. They align her actions with her values, her words with her truth, her life with her inner standards. The world adjusts accordingly. Some doors close without apology, others open without force. What remains is not louder but cleaner, steadier, and more real, shaped by a woman who knows that self-respect does not begin with how others treat her, but with what she no longer allows, what she calmly steps away from, what she chooses to protect even when no one is watching, even when it would be easier to let it slide, even when silence feels heavier than compromise. Silence is strength, not weakness, and it is one of the most misunderstood forms of power. Many believe that silence means submission, fear, or the inability to speak. But true silence is chosen, not forced. It comes from awareness, not insecurity. A woman who understands this does not rush to fill every gap with words or defend herself against every misunderstanding. She knows that not every situation deserves her voice. Silence creates space. In that space, emotions settle, clarity emerges, and truth reveals itself. When a woman remains silent instead of reacting, she steps out of chaos and into control. She observes before responding, listens before judging, and chooses her actions with intention. This restraint is not passive, it is disciplined. It requires strength to pause when everything urges you to react. Those who rely on noise feel uncomfortable around silence. Silence removes distraction. It exposes motives. It forces people to sit with their own words and actions. When a woman chooses silence, she allows others to reveal themselves fully. She does not interrupt their behavior with explanations or emotional reactions. She lets patterns speak louder than promises. Silence also protects dignity. Arguing with disrespect lowers energy. Explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you drains it. A woman who values herself knows that her worth is not decided in debates or emotional exchanges. She understands that some battles are won by not entering them at all. Walking away quietly preserves her power more than winning an argument ever could. In silence, boundaries become clearer. Words can be twisted, but silence is firm. When she withdraws attention, access, and emotional availability, the message is unmistakable. Silence communicates standards without negotiation. It says that her peace is not available for disruption, and her time is not open for misuse. Silence strengthens self-control. Reactivity hands power to others. Every emotional outburst gives someone else the ability to steer your state of mind. By staying silent, a woman keeps that power within herself. She responds when ready, not when provoked. This control creates a calm presence that cannot be shaken easily. There is also wisdom in silence. Not everything needs to be shared. Not everyone needs to know her plans, struggles, or next moves. Silence allows her to grow privately, fail quietly, and rise without announcing every step. It shields her progress from unnecessary opinions and interference. Growth becomes deeper when it is not constantly explained. Silence does not mean suppression. It does not mean accepting mistreatment or avoiding truth. It means choosing the right moment, the right words, and the right audience. A strong woman speaks when it matters and stays silent when words would weaken her position. She knows that timing can transform the impact of any message. In relationships, silence can reset dynamics. When a woman stops over-explaining, over-giving, and overreacting, patterns change. People either rise to meet her standard or fall away. Silence reveals who respects her presence and who only valued her reactions. It removes emotional dependency and replaces it with clarity. Silence builds inner authority. The more she trusts herself, the less she needs external validation. She no longer measures her worth by being heard, liked, or understood by everyone. She becomes comfortable with being misjudged by those who do not know her depth. This comfort is freedom. A woman who understands the power of silence carries herself differently. Her calm unsettles those who expect chaos. Her stillness commands attention without demanding it. She does not chase closure or force conclusions. She allows life to respond to her restraint. Silence becomes her filter, her shield, her discipline, her quiet declaration that her energy is sacred, her peace is intentional, and her strength does not need volume to be felt. Standards teach others how to treat you long before words ever do. People learn what is acceptable not from what you say once, but from what you tolerate repeatedly. A woman's standards are reflected in her choices, her reactions, and the consistency of her behavior. When her standards are low, she explains herself often and feels disappointed frequently. When her standards are clear, her life becomes quieter, more intentional, and less chaotic. Standards begin internally. Before anyone else respects them, she must believe she deserves better. This belief changes how she enters conversations, relationships, and commitments. She no longer hopes people will do the right thing, she expects it. She no longer tries to earn basic respect through effort or sacrifice. She understands that effort is meant for growth, not for proving worth. A woman with standards does not correct people constantly. She does not lecture or threaten. She allows actions to reveal alignment or lack of it. When behavior falls below her standard, she adjusts her presence, not her values. She withdraws access calmly instead of engaging in emotional negotiations. This quiet adjustment teaches more effectively than any argument. Consistency is what gives standards their power. A standard enforced once but ignored later becomes a suggestion. A woman who respects herself applies her standards, whether she is tired, lonely, or afraid of losing someone. She knows that compromising standards for temporary comfort always leads to long-term dissatisfaction. Every time she stays aligned with them, she strengthens her self-trust. Standards protect emotional energy. Without them, she becomes available to everyone's moods, demands, and expectations. With them, she chooses where her energy goes. She no longer feels responsible for fixing people or managing their reactions. She understands that someone's disappointment is not always a sign she did something wrong. High standards often make people uncomfortable. They expose entitlement, inconsistency, and lack of effort. Some will accuse her of being cold, difficult, or changed. She accepts this without defensiveness. She knows that raising her standards does not push the right people away, it filters out the wrong ones. Comfort with being misunderstood is part of maintaining integrity. Standards shape self-image. When a woman consistently honors what she will and will not accept, her confidence becomes grounded rather than performative. She does not need constant reassurance because her actions reinforce her value daily. She begins to walk away from situations sooner, not because she is less patient, but because she is more aware. In relationships, standards create clarity. They eliminate guessing games and unspoken resentment. A woman who maintains standards does not wait for repeated disappointment before acting. She responds to patterns, not promises. She knows that potential is meaningless without consistent behavior. This awareness keeps her from investing in illusions. Standards are not rigid rules imposed on others. They are reflections of self-respect. They evolve as awareness grows. What she once tolerated out of fear or inexperience no longer fits her sense of self. Letting go of old standards can feel uncomfortable, but growth demands it. Each new level of self-respect requires a new level of discernment. A woman's standards influence every area of her life. They affect how she works, who she allows close, how she speaks to herself, and how she responds under pressure. Over time, her environment begins to mirror her expectations. She no longer has to demand respect because she has structured her life to support it. People either rise to meet her standard or quietly remove themselves, leaving behind a life that feels aligned, lighter, and honest, shaped by deliberate choices rather than emotional reactions, guided by clarity instead of fear, sustained by a woman who understands that standards are not about controlling others, but about honoring herself through every decision she makes. Self-worth does not seek validation, because it is not built on applause, agreement, or approval. When a woman understands her value, she stops outsourcing her confidence to the opinions of others. She no longer scans faces for reassurance or measures her worth by how she is received. Her sense of self becomes internal, steady, and less affected by praise or criticism. Validation seeking often begins as a habit formed in survival. At some point, approval felt necessary to belong, to be chosen, or to feel safe. Over time, this habit turns into dependency. A woman starts shaping herself to be acceptable rather than authentic. She adjusts her voice, her boundaries, and her desires to fit expectations. This constant adjustment slowly disconnects her from herself. When self-worth becomes grounded, this pattern breaks. A woman realizes that not being liked is not the same as being wrong. She allows disagreement without taking it personally. She stops explaining herself to earn understanding. She accepts that some people will never see her clearly, and that clarity does not require consensus. A woman who no longer seeks validation becomes more selective with her energy. She does not perform goodness or strength for recognition. She does not overachieve to feel deserving. She understands that effort is not proof of worth, and that rest is not laziness. Her value remains intact whether she is productive or still. This shift changes how she communicates. She speaks honestly without softening her truth to be palatable. She listens without absorbing every opinion. She does not rush to defend her choices. Silence becomes comfortable because her identity is no longer fragile. She trusts herself enough to stand alone in her decisions. Without the need for validation, manipulation loses power. Praise no longer controls her, and criticism no longer destabilizes her. She can receive feedback without collapsing, and compliments without becoming dependent. Her reactions become measured rather than emotional. This balance gives her a quiet authority that others can sense. In relationships, self-worth creates healthier dynamics. A woman stops chasing attention and starts choosing connection. She no longer confuses intensity with intimacy or approval with love. She recognizes when she is being valued for who she is versus what she provides. This awareness prevents overgiving and resentment. Letting go of validation also means accepting solitude. A woman becomes comfortable with her own company. She no longer fills silence with noise or distraction. Solitude becomes a place of restoration rather than loneliness. In that space, she hears her own voice more clearly and strengthens her intuition. Self-worth grounded within allows a woman to fail without losing herself. Mistakes become information, not identity. She learns without self-punishment. Growth becomes natural rather than forced. She no longer needs external proof to continue moving forward. As validation loses importance, alignment gains priority. A woman measures success by how closely her life reflects her values. She chooses peace over popularity and honesty over approval. Her decisions become simpler because they are guided from within rather than negotiated externally. This internal grounding changes how she shows up in the world. She becomes less reactive and more intentional. Her presence feels calm because it is not searching for confirmation. She stands firmly in who she is becoming, unaffected by shifting opinions, steady through uncertainty, anchored by a sense of worth that does not rise or fall, with attention, likes, praise, or rejection, shaped quietly through self-knowledge, reinforced daily through choices that honor her truth rather than satisfy the expectations of others. Energy is preserved by saying no, not out of defiance, but out of clarity. A woman's energy is one of her most valuable resources, yet it is often the first thing she gives away without thought. Every yes costs something. Time, focus, emotional presence, and mental space are all exchanged the moment she agrees to something. When she says yes too quickly or too often, she slowly empties herself. Many women are taught to equate availability with kindness. They learn that being helpful means being accessible, that being loving means being accommodating. Over time, this belief turns into self-neglect. A woman begins to feel responsible for everyone's comfort, expectations, and emotions. She becomes tired not because she does too much, but because she does too much of what is not aligned. Saying no is not rejection, it is direction. It directs energy back to where it belongs. When a woman chooses no, she creates space for what truly matters. She begins to notice how much of her exhaustion comes from obligations she never chose consciously. With each intentional no, she regains a sense of control over her life. A clear no protects boundaries without explanation. A woman does not owe access to her time or emotional labor simply because it is requested. When she feels compelled to justify every refusal, it reveals how deeply she has been conditioned to please. Learning to say no calmly, without guilt or over-explanation, is an act of self-respect. Preserving energy also means recognizing emotional drains. Not every conversation deserves engagement. Not every conflict needs resolution. Some situations resolve themselves when attention is removed. A woman who understands this stops trying to manage everything. She steps back and allows natural consequences to occur. Saying no strengthens self-trust. Each time a woman listens to her inner resistance and honors it, she reinforces the belief that her needs matter. This trust builds confidence. She becomes less scattered, less resentful, and more present in the commitments she chooses to keep. Her yes becomes more meaningful because it is no longer automatic. There is discomfort in saying no at first. Guilt may arise. Fear of disappointing others may surface. A woman may worry about being misunderstood or judged. But discomfort is temporary. Resentment from overcommitting lasts far longer. Choosing no protects her long-term peace at the cost of short-term unease. Energy preservation changes behavior patterns. A woman becomes more selective with her time, more intentional with her attention. She no longer fills her schedule to feel needed. She allows rest without apology. She understands that stillness is not wasted time but essential recovery. In relationships, saying no resets balance. It prevents emotional overextension and one-sided effort. A woman stops pouring into spaces that do not refill her. She notices who respects her limits and who resists them. This awareness clarifies which connections are sustainable. Preserving energy also enhances focus. When a woman is no longer pulled in multiple directions, her mind becomes clearer. She makes better decisions. Creativity returns. Motivation becomes internal rather than forced. Energy conserved is energy available for growth. A woman who values her energy moves differently. She responds instead of reacts. She chooses depth over quantity. Her presence becomes fuller because it is not diluted. She understands that her energy is finite and sacred, and that every no is not a loss but an investment in alignment, balance, and self-respect, quietly reshaping her life through deliberate choice, steady restraint, and an unwavering commitment to protect what sustains her from the inside out. Inner discipline creates outer respect, because behavior is the most honest language a person speaks. Discipline is not about control imposed from the outside. It is order chosen from within. When a woman develops inner discipline, her actions become consistent, her reactions measured, and her presence grounded. Others sense this stability without being told. Inner discipline begins with self-observation. A woman notices her impulses without immediately obeying them. She becomes aware of emotional triggers, habits of avoidance, and patterns of self-sabotage. Instead of reacting, she pauses. This pause is where discipline is born. It is the space between urge and action where choice replaces instinct. A disciplined woman does not chase immediate comfort at the cost of long-term respect. She resists the need to explain herself excessively, to overindulge emotionally, or to seek quick validation. She chooses restraint when expression would weaken her position. This restraint shapes her character quietly and steadily. Consistency is the visible result of inner discipline. A woman shows up as herself regardless of mood or external pressure. She keeps her word to herself before making promises to others. She follows through on what matters and lets go of what does not align. This reliability creates trust. People know what to expect because her behavior is not unpredictable. Outer respect is often a reflection of internal order. When a woman lacks discipline, her boundaries blur, her emotions lead, and her standards fluctuate. This inconsistency invites disregard. When discipline is present, boundaries are firm, communication is clear, and decisions are intentional. Respect follows naturally because clarity leaves little room for confusion. Inner discipline also governs speech. A woman chooses her words carefully. She does not speak from impulse or emotion alone. She understands that words once released cannot be retrieved. Silence becomes a tool, not a retreat. When she speaks, her words carry weight because they are rare and considered. Discipline strengthens emotional independence. A woman no longer allows her mood to be dictated by others' actions. She regulates herself rather than demanding regulation from the world. This self-governance is powerful. It removes the need to control others and replaces it with control of self. Over time, inner discipline reshapes identity. A woman begins to trust herself deeply because she sees proof in her own behavior. She no longer feels scattered or reactive. Her confidence becomes quiet and stable. She does not need to assert authority. It is felt. Outer respect often arrives subtly. People listen more closely. Interruptions decrease. Expectations adjust. This is not because she demands respect, but because her presence sets a tone. Discipline communicates self-worth without explanation. Inner discipline also protects from burnout. A woman learns when to push and when to rest. She understands that discipline includes recovery, not just effort. Balance becomes part of her strength. She no longer sacrifices herself to prove resilience. A disciplined inner life creates a composed outer life. A woman moves with intention, responds with clarity, and holds herself to standards she expects from others. This alignment creates a natural authority. Respect becomes a response, not a request, growing steadily through consistent action, calm restraint, emotional regulation, and unwavering self-accountability that shapes how the world meets her. Every day the message is simple, but its impact is deep. Everything changes the moment a woman chooses to respect herself, not through noise, confrontation, or explanation, but through quiet alignment with her own values. When boundaries are clear, silence becomes strength. When standards are upheld, Behavior speaks louder than words. When validation is no longer needed, confidence stabilizes. When energy is protected, life becomes lighter. When inner discipline is practiced, respect follows naturally. This is not about becoming cold or distant. It is about becoming clear. Clear about what is acceptable, what is no longer tolerated, and what truly matters. A woman who respects herself does not force change in others. She changes her own choices, and the world adjusts in response. Relationships shift, opportunities realign, and peace becomes less fragile. Self-respect is not a moment. It is a practice. A daily commitment to act in alignment with inner truth rather than external pressure. Through this practice, a woman does more than improve her life. She sets a standard, leaves a quiet imprint, and becomes living proof that when self-respect is present, everything else rearranges itself around it.